Here we go. Welcome back. Week 1, day 3, Eraly Animation Studios. Actually, I'm going to be focusing a bit more on a few key animators. On Sunday, next week, I'm going to go over some key innovations. In other words, basically, who did the who invented cell animation, who invented the what they call the tear book. The only thing that I'm going to be talking about at this point is the rotoscope, and that is Max Fleischer. So that's kind of that. So today, overview, we did questions, lectures. You'll see what the assignments are and viewings, and I will add a couple more viewings to the. I'll add a couple more viewings to what's here, and that'll be clearly marked in the teaching materials. And there are no journals until Sunday. So okay. So basically, what happens is that here are currently the readings that are due. I've got that section from the Animator Survival Kit, which is down in week 1. I've got probably chapters 2, 3, 4, definitely 3 and 4 of A New History of Animation. You know, try to get through that as best you can. And then this one, Animation Art, Pencil to Pixel, I'll have that uploaded today. And really, that's, you know, like with the animators. Here's the thing is that, you know, we handed out the we handed out some 4 books. Was it The Illusion of Life, Animator Survival Kit, which I don't think we'll order anymore. We'll just distribute the PDF, and then and Character Animation Crash Course, and I think there's a 4th one. I think it's like Setting the Stage. And so anyway, the idea with those is that in a classroom situation, in a physical situation, we wanted you to have those 4 books staring at you all the time and saying, you know, there's something in here, and having these things, these artifacts, daring you to open them all the time. So we'll see how much we are in class. Okay, an outline. Emergence of cinema, animation special effects, some early studios, and I'm really going to be talking about this in regards to some of the early animators. So basically, there's some early, I'd kind of call early studios like the Lumiere brothers, Edison, Black Mariah, and Méliès. And the thing that's really important to understand when you think about early animation is that it is so closely tied to early cinema. I mean, there are 2 things. Is that on one hand, basically all the early animators were comic artists for the most part. You know, McKay, Fleischer, the guy who did Felix the Cat. You know, basically, really, it's just comics in motion. And actually, the other thing is that I am going to get you also one other book to look through called Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. Unbelievable book. And the thing is that I think one of the ways to understand animation is to understand comics. Because the thing is that actually what happens is that, in my opinion, your storyboard when you're doing an animation is really, the comic of your animation. So, in my opinion, I usually kind of tell people to do storyboards as if you're doing a comic book. Um, that's kind of doing the visual narrative. Um, so, um, and then for me, making an animation is basically making your comic or your manga, then kind of like doing, you know, a rough animation or an animatic, and then fleshing it out into a full animation, and that's the process. So, and it's kind of like those of you who are taking Animation 1, if you saw that one image of the development from a mannequin to an anime character, you rough in the shape, you get the body worked out, you get the clothing all taken care of, and then you work out the details. I mean, it's really the design process is always about, going from idea to rough to and refining things. And same with painting. I mean, like, you know, like Sarah. I mean, what you wind up doing is that you do a rough cartoon, you underpaint, you rough things in, and then you work it out. It's we're always going um, from rough to fine. So the Lumiere brothers, basically they were the ones. Remember they did the cinematograph, that crazy thing that had 17-meter 50-second things. Well, so what happens is that they were the first ones to be doing live projections, right? And they did like everyday stuff, like a baby eating at the dinner at the breakfast table, and the factory workers exiting work. So the thing is, and here we say here is like workers leaving the Lumiere factory. But the thing is that these were like 50-second things, and they'd run like 5 or 10 of them, and um, we just kind of considered these really kind of basic things. But back then, this was like really, really avant-garde stuff. So the thing is that it was the fact that people hadn't seen realistic reproductions of stuff in time, and that is really kind of important. So one of the things that was really important was something called arrival of a train at La Ciotat station, and the thing is that they showed it at a cinematic size. And people really freaked out. I mean, in some ways, they had never seen anything like this before. So they thought that really what happens is that there's this thing called a camera obscura. Basically, the thing is that, and don't try this at home, but if you put a hole in if you put a small hole in the wall to the outside, and the wall is pretty thin. So say for example, or the thing is that if you put a piece of paper with a hole on your window and you blocked everything out, if it was sunny enough out, you would see an upside down picture on your other wall of what's outside. And that's the whole idea of the camera. And the other thing that, by the way, the other thing that's really kind of strange is that um, just a little bit of mechanics on the eye. I had a little eye problem last year, and they actually did a little bit of laser on it, and so I had a spot, in my vision. But the thing is I thought that, wait a second, is that they do it down on the bottom, and I see it on the top. And the thing that's really interesting and something that's really fascinating to think about human perception and the eye and how we do everything, and how we see things. Um, the image on our retina is actually upside down, and our brain flips it, which is something that I had totally forgotten about and is really, to me, an amazing thing. So I'm not going to show all the pieces, but this is like 50 seconds, and I want to show you this. And the bottom one here is like super incredibly cool because of one thing, is that this is something that was, and I think I can't show all these because, well, actually a lot of these I can show because they're in public domain now. But this one was redone in 2010. I mean 2020, restored using artificial intelligence, which was really cool. So let's watch. So you get the idea. Now watch this. This is nuts. This is there's a Russian guy um, who was out on Reddit, who was a artificial intelligence enthusiast, and he restored this using AI and took it up to 4K. And actually did he actually put sound to it. It's amazing. But look at this. This is crazy. I mean, there's some errors in it, but come on. It's really good compared. That's just outstanding. So, hang on. Yeah. So, another person who was a pioneer in cinema is, and he actually made his own kinetoscope thing, which basically turned into the mutoscope. Basically, it was something that you look down into and you crank the film. Very similar to the very kind of a personal viewing experience, but very similar to the Lumieres. The only thing is that he started this studio in 1893, and basically Edison started. And if you're not familiar with Thomas Edison, um, a lot of people call him America's greatest inventor, but I call him America's greatest innovator because of the fact that he rarely came up with any ideas on his own. Basically, what happened is that he took a lot of other people's ideas, like Nikola Tesla's idea for distributed power, and or the light bulb, or movies, and that sort of thing, and made them more commercially viable. Although Edison didn't succeed with power. Actually, Tesla Tesla 1, and I'm sorry, I'm a big Nikola Tesla fan. So anyway, um, so he created this studio for basically about took about a year, and actually he did it for about what would nowadays be probably about 80,000 dirhams. And and this was his movie studio, very humble, and one of the films that he did, um, and I just I just want you to go back and see it just because it's kind of important in regards to how early films were made and how special effects were put forth. The next one I'm going to talk about by Georges Méliès, the trip to the moon. You got to see that one. But I'm just going to just show about like. So but I'm jumping around a bit, but that's all right. I'm not gonna. I basically am much more interested in telling you, who are the people starting cinema, and we'll get into a few names in animation, and we'll continue next week. So, Méliès was, actually, he was a stage magician. And then, he was also, a director. And the thing is that what he really did is that he started doing special effects. In other words, he did things like uh, double exposures, doing forms of optical printing, using what they call beam splitters, which is like a half mirrored, um, a mirror with half the mirroring on it, so you can see through it as well as get the reflection on it to combine action. Time lapse, basically, and a substitution splice is basically what happens is that when um, you have a scene and then you stop the camera and then you change something out and it looks like, oh look, hey, something suddenly happened. And then also they also hand painted some of the films. So that's kind of it. Is that and I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but I mean this is like one of the most famous pieces of all time. And the one thing that I really like to do is that I really like to make fun of this bit. I like to make fun of myself with this because I kind of say that, look at this, academia hasn't changed at all. We're all the same, um, running around with our pointy hats. So putting ourselves into making big bullets and giant guns and right there we go. See, this is nothing like Elon Musk, right? And sorry, I just have to, I just got to do this one scene. That's just really horrible. Anyway. Yay, we're on the moon. And then, of course, for Aya, we'll wind up talking about, your basic colonial colonialist discourse of the Europeans showing up and decimating the indigenous peoples and then going back home. So it's there's some problems with this, but come on, it's 1902. Exactly. That's totally it. So it's like, look at this. This is, you know what? You know what this is. So look, we just killed the king of the Moonanites. So, and if you caught that reference, well, and of course, there you go. That's cool. So you know what we'll probably have to do is that we'll probably have to, in the last week, we'll probably have to refer back to this by talking about Aqua Teen Hunger Force and the return of the Moonanites. Sort of like, how contemporary animators actually refer to history. So actually, the Aqua Teen Hunger Force, animators are actually kind of referring to this. So it's kind of funny. Um, so early studios, pioneers, a lot of technologies, and remember this guy Emil Cole? Actually, I don't have this in this. It'll be in the next PowerPoint. But I guess on Sunday it'll be time for me to show you my cell collection, and then we'll talk about cells. But what Emil Cole and his group did is that they did this thing called the tear book. In other words, it was basically like having a pad of paper, and then you draw, you rip it off, draw, you rip off the piece of paper, and you know. Um, I mean, initially that's kind of fine, but because you can do what they call onion skinning, which is what we're doing in Animation 1. And I'm finally teaching onion skinning. And for those of you who don't know, onion skinning is the technique of setting up your software so that you can see a ghost of a couple images before and afterwards, so you can have continuity in your animation. So, and then I'll talk about the birth of cell animation, and then there's also the something as simple as using the three peg registration technique. In other words, like when you're using a piece of acetate, a cell, you basically have the light table, and then on it you have a little bracket or whatnot that has three pegs on it, and that's how you keep everything perfectly aligned. And you might think that that's just common sense, but honestly, there was a time when that didn't exist. So it was really a matter of putting them down on a flat, taking your if you looked at Gertie the dinosaur, you can see all the sheets of A4 paper, actually letter-size paper in the U.S., that Winsor McCay did, and then what he did is that he put them on a table where everything was registered. You know, he basically put them on a table where there was like an L square, and shot them. And I mean, it was fine, but it was more difficult than using the pin alignment system. And with the pin alignment system, and I'll show you a picture of this on Sunday, you can put multiple cells together, and which you can't do with paper. So I mean, that's the thing. So you can do, you know, one cell. You could do a background cell. You could put a background, then put a lower cell, put the character on top, put something on top of that. You know, so that's where the pin system worked out. So yeah, let's talk about some technical stuff on Sunday. So Max Fleischer, let's see here. His parents were Polish. He was an American. He was an American artist. He was also very scientifically minded. He was also very into optics. And so what he was able to do was that he created a lot of innovations. You know, like he did animations from what they call beam splitter, you know, or, you know, if you see these things on Indiegogo, you know, there's this life drawing thing which basically just has a mirror in it. That's basically, Fleischer was one of the people who innovated that for animation. And I'm not saying that, you know, he invented the thing, but he innovated it and applied it to animation. So this is the patent diagram of his rotoscope. So his studio became quite famous. Became part of AAP. We'll talk about that next week. And one of his early characters was called Coco the Clown. And the thing is that, as I said before, this is kind of interesting because, you know, a lot of these early animators were comic book artists, you know, or newspaper comic artists. And what's also interesting about this is the other thing that's interesting about these is that they're doing innovations like integrating live and animated stuff. So and I won't show you the whole thing. Remember, this is 1921. It's still silent. First, by the way, on the exam, first movie with a synchronized soundtrack, Steamboat Willie, 1928. That will be on the exam. So consider that before 1921, you've got somebody just playing a piano or playing a record or something, you know? But look at this. Also consider what's going on here is that the smoothness of this is basically from this from what they call rotoscoping. In other words, what he did is that he drew Coco from somebody who was actually dancing through that device. So the thing is that there was actually some, some pretty interesting stuff going on pretty early. And another thing that's really interesting throughout the history of animation is this idea of breaking the fourth wall, this idea of talking through the screen. This started. This basically started in theater in the 1920s with a guy named Bertolt Brecht, and I'm not going to ask you to remember that. But the thing is that it was really shocking when characters in the theater basically went off stage and started going into the audience and started talking to the audience, the characters and that sort of thing. In other words, so then you wound up with what Brecht would call total theater. In other words, the the theater was no longer confined to the stage, so it was everything now. So in this case, here we have, Fleischer, um, looking at everything becoming animation, which I think is actually really interesting. So, and of course, he's a cartoon; he can do anything he wants. Sorry, and I'm going on for a while with this, but I think this is really a great animation. Fleischer was a real innovator. So that's, and then the one thing that he would do, and by the way, we're going to watch one of these on Japan Week. And all I'm going to say is that he would also do Popeye the Sailor.
Oh, hey, leave me down, you goofy goon. Oh. Hey, you're trying to get closey, huh? Well, I don't like you and none of your relatives. How do you like that? Oh, yeah? Here comes another one of them funny guys. Well, over you go.
So the thing that by things like by the 30s, Fleischer Studios was getting distribution deals with Paramount, and so what we have is like in the 1910s, we have small studios that basically start solidifying in the 1920s, and then become part of the Hollywood system by the 1930s. So, as I said, that animation really does run in parallel with with the development of cinema, actually. And the one thing that I always do say is that animation is merely is merely just illustrated cinema, and that's it. Or as Scott McCloud says, comics in time. So I usually tend to look at animation from a cinematic perspective, but the scholar and comic book artist Scott McCloud looks at comics in time, and the thing is, I'm looking at it as illustrated cinema. Okay, guess what? We are back to Disney, and I won't play this whole thing for you. This is for you to look at, but and you know, Walt Disney had a real fascination with Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. So I mean, um, which is pretty obvious, given that they've revisited this story about 2 or 3 times. Um, so the thing that's important about Disney, and this would be a great research paper, is looking at the idea of Disney and innovation. So, say for example, they were some of the first ones to do optical printing. They were some of the first ones to do. They were the first ones to do a synchronized soundtrack. They were the first ones to do a computer graphic animation. Full length animation, computer graphic animation. They were also the first one to be using what they call vocoders, which is basically taking sound and manipulating it with the human voice box. So there were all sorts of different things that Disney did, and for all the good and bad of Disney, Disney has really pushed the idea of animation. I mean, especially as creepy. The Lion King is creepy, isn't it? I mean, the new CGI, the newer CGI version. That's just creepy. So this is Alice's Wonderland. So basically, she's saying, "Hey, I want to be in your, I want to go in your animations. This is great." And there's Walt. And you can watch the whole thing. but she goes off to bed, and then she dreams about being in her dad Walt's animations. By the way, I think I'll also give you the principles of animation. Um, and the thing is that as you look through these things, you can see all the different aspects of the principles of animation. And I think it'd be important for you to see this. Probably for next week. And the other thing, by the way, for animators and multimedia, look at how some of these things are constructed. So for animation 2, you can actually think about how these things are put together. And it can actually make your animating much easier, honestly. Because, see, if you look, that's the same hippo in the back, going again and again and again. And this is basically just a walk cycle and that sort of thing. And then we've got Alice optically printed in here. So, you know, a lot of early animation is really there's a lot of loops. There's a lot of pauses. You know, I'll tell you something. A lot of you in my animation classes really make a lot more work for yourself than you have to do. So, and then of course Alice escapes and everything's fine. And there you go. So watch that to your leisure. So assignments: read chapters 2 and 3 in A New History of Animation by Sunday. No journals till Sunday. Watch these films and not 2 or 3 more will be added. Like I'll do Crazy Cat and Ignat's Mouse. So, and that's really sort of it. Let me stop things here.